Everyone knows where they were on September 11th, 2001. Most Americans watched the horror unfold on television, helpless and heartbroken. But Tom Hanks wasn't watching from a distance. Within hours of the towers falling, he was at ground zero, not as a celebrity, not with cameras, but as a volunteer working alongside firefighters, digging through rubble, searching for survivors. For 15 years, he never spoke about it, never took credit, never used it for publicity. Until a retired firefighter recognized him at the 2016 memorial and revealed the truth. Tom Hanks spent 3 days at ground zero, and the first responders who worked beside him have been keeping his secret ever since. This isn't a story about celebrity heroics or publicity stunts. This is about the day America needed everyone to step up, and one of Hollywood's biggest stars showed up without telling a soul. If you're ready to discover why true patriotism sometimes means serving in silence, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. This story will restore your faith in what it means to be an American. Let's honor the heroes who were there. September 11th, 2001. Tom Hanks was at his home in Los Angeles when the first plane hit the North Tower at 8:46 a.m. Eastern Time. Like millions of Americans, he turned on the television and watched in horror as the unthinkable unfolded. The second plane hit at 9:03 a.m. By 10:00 a.m., both towers had collapsed. The Pentagon was burning. A fourth plane had crashed in Pennsylvania. Tom sat frozen in front of the television, watching his country under attack. He saw firefighters running into burning buildings. He saw people jumping from windows 100 stories high. He saw the towers collapse in clouds of ash and debris, and like every American watching, he felt absolutely helpless. But unlike most Americans, Tom Hanks had resources and connections that could get him to New York immediately if he chose. His first instinct was to call someone, anyone, and ask what he could do to help. He called his manager. He called friends in New York. He called charitable organizations. Everyone gave him the same answer. Stay where you are. Don't get in the way. Let the professionals handle it. Tom understood that logic. The last thing Ground Zero needed was a celebrity showing up for a photo opportunity. But as he watched the coverage throughout that horrible day and into the night, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that waiting and watching wasn't enough. By midnight, Tom made a decision. He called a private pilot he knew and chartered a flight to New Jersey. He called a friend who ran a construction company and asked what supplies rescue workers would need. And he made one more call to his publicist with specific instructions. No one can know about this. No press. No cameras. If word gets out that I'm going to New York, cancel everything. Tom Hanks landed in New Jersey at 6 a.m. on September 12th. He rented a truck, loaded it with water bottles, work gloves, respirator masks, flashlights, and first aid supplies. He changed into old jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a baseball cap, and he drove into Manhattan toward the smoke still rising from Ground Zero. The city was in lockdown. Police had barricades everywhere, but Tom had obtained credentials through his construction company friend, credentials that identified him as a volunteer construction worker, not as Tom Hanks, the actor. At the checkpoint, an exhausted police officer barely glanced at his ID before waving him through. Ground Zero was hell on earth. The air was thick with toxic dust and smoke. The smell, burning metal, jet fuel, death, was overwhelming. Everywhere Tom looked, he saw firefighters and rescue workers covered in ash, their faces masks of exhaustion and grief. The towers had been reduced to a mountain of twisted steel, concrete, and glass that rose several stories high. Tom found the volunteer coordination area and asked where he could help. A Red Cross coordinator, too exhausted to question who he was or why he was there, handed him a respirator mask and pointed him toward a section where workers were hand-searching through rubble, looking for survivors or remains. "Can you lift heavy debris?" the coordinator asked. "Yes," Tom said. "Can you work 12-hour shifts?" "I'll work as long as you need me." "Then grab some gloves and join the line. We're passing debris bucket by bucket. It's slow work, but it's the only way to search properly without causing more collapse." Tom pulled on work gloves, adjusted his respirator mask, and joined a line of firefighters, construction workers, and volunteers forming a human chain. They passed buckets of rubble from the pile to a sorting area where each piece was examined for any sign of human remains or personal effects. For the next 12 hours, Tom Hanks did backbreaking work in toxic air alongside heroes who didn't know they were working next to a movie star. He barely spoke. He just worked, lifting, passing, digging, searching. His hands blistered. His back screamed. His lungs burned despite the mask. None of it mattered. During a brief water break, Tom found himself standing next to a firefighter who looked barely 25 years old. The young man's eyes were red from crying and dust. His hands shook as he tried to drink water. "You okay?" Tom asked quietly. The firefighter shook his head. "My captain was in the North Tower. We can't find him. We can't find any of them from my house." His voice broke. "I should have been there. I was off duty. I should have been there." Tom put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "You're here now. You're searching for them. That's what matters." "But what if we don't find them? What if there's nothing left to find?" "Then you keep searching anyway," Tom said, "because that's what brothers do. You don't give up." The young firefighter nodded, wiped his eyes, and went back to the pile. Tom went with him. They worked side by side for the next 6 hours. Tom returned to Ground Zero for 3 consecutive days. Each day he arrived before dawn and worked until his body nearly gave out. He never identified himself. He never took photos. He never drew attention to his presence. To the first responders working beside him, he was just another volunteer in a hard hat and respirator mask, one of thousands of Americans who had shown up to help. But on the 3rd day, something happened that Tom hadn't anticipated. During another water break, a firefighter named Michael Rodriguez pulled off his mask to wipe his face, and Tom did the same. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Tom saw recognition flash across Michael's ash-covered face. Michael's eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly. He looked like he was about to say something, but Tom quickly shook his head and put a finger to his lips. A silent plea. "Please don't." Michael hesitated, then nodded slowly. He understood. This wasn't about recognition or celebrity. This was about work that needed to be done. Michael pulled his mask back on and returned to the pile. So did Tom, and neither of them spoke about it. Tom left Ground Zero on September 14th. He flew back to Los Angeles, took a long shower to wash away the ash and dust that had embedded itself in every pore, and returned to his regular life. He never spoke publicly about those 3 days. When reporters asked where he had been during 9/11, he gave vague answers about being home in Los Angeles, praying for the victims, and donating to relief funds. For 15 years, Tom Hanks carried the secret of what he had done, and for 15 years, the first responders who had recognized him, and there were more than just Michael Rodriguez, kept that secret out of respect for what Tom's silence represented, that some acts of service aren't meant for public recognition. Until September 11th, 2016, when everything changed. 15 years after the attacks, Tom Hanks attended the annual 9/11 memorial ceremony at Ground Zero. He came every year, always quietly, always in the back of the crowd, to honor the 2,977 people who had died. He came because he had been there, in the days after, and he felt a connection to this place and these people that went beyond anything he could explain. The 2016 ceremony was particularly emotional. Families of victims read names aloud. Children who had been born after their fathers died stood at microphones and spoke about parents they never knew. The ceremony was a reminder that 9/11 wasn't just history. It was a living wound that would never fully heal. Tom stood near the South Pool, where the South Tower once stood. The memorial's reflecting pool was surrounded by bronze panels bearing the names of the dead. Tom's eyes scanned the names, reading each one, remembering the faces of firefighters he had worked beside during those 3 days. That's when he felt a hand on his shoulder. Tom turned to find a man in his mid-60s standing behind him. He wore an FDNY dress uniform with medals and badges. His hair was gray, his face weathered, but his eyes were unmistakable. This was Michael Rodriguez, the firefighter who had recognized Tom 15 years ago at Ground Zero. "Mr. Hanks," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know if you remember me, Tom studied the man's face and felt recognition dawn. Ground Zero, September 2001. You were FDNY Ladder Company 15, Michael finished. I was there all 6 days, including the 3 days you were there with us. The people standing nearby were starting to notice the conversation. Some recognized Tom. Others recognized Michael's FDNY dress uniform and medals. A small crowd began to form, curious about what was happening. Tom's first instinct was to deflect, to keep the secret as he had for 15 years. But something in Michael's eyes stopped him. This wasn't about publicity or recognition. This was something else. Michael, Tom started, but Michael interrupted him. For 15 years I've kept your secret, Michael said, loud enough now that the growing crowd could hear. For 15 years, everyone who recognized you down there kept your secret, because we understood what you were doing and why you didn't want recognition for it. Tom shook his head. Michael, please, this isn't the time or place. Yes, it is, Michael said firmly. It's exactly the time and place. Because for 15 years, I've watched you never mention that you were there, never take credit, never use it for publicity or career benefit. And I've watched the country forget that ordinary Americans showed up to help, not for glory, not for recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. And you were one of them. The crowd around them had grown larger. People were recording on their phones now. Tom felt his carefully maintained secret beginning to unravel, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Michael's voice grew stronger. This man, he pointed at Tom, spent 3 days at Ground Zero in September 2001. He worked alongside firefighters and construction workers, passing buckets of debris, searching for survivors and remains. He breathed the same toxic air we all breathed. He got the same blisters on his hands. He did the same back-breaking work. And when he left, he never told anyone. Not the press, not in interviews, not for 15 years. Tom felt tears burning his eyes. Michael, I didn't do anything special. I just showed up. Thousands of people showed up. Exactly, Michael said. Thousands of ordinary Americans showed up. But you weren't ordinary. You were one of the most famous people in the world, and you showed up anyway. Not with cameras, not with a press team. Just you, in work clothes and a hard hat, willing to do whatever was needed. That's what America is supposed to be about. That's what we lost sight of somewhere along the way. Michael turned to address the crowd now gathering around them. I lost 8 brothers from my firehouse on 9/11. 8 men I worked with, ate with, lived with. They ran into those towers and never came out. And in the days after, when we were digging through rubble looking for them, this man, he gestured to Tom again, was there beside us, not looking for credit, not looking for attention, just working, just helping, just being an American when America needed everyone to step up. The crowd was completely silent now. Several people were crying, others were recording every word. Tom stood frozen, unable to speak, as 15 years of carefully guarded privacy dissolved in front of him. Mr. Hanks, Michael said, turning back to Tom, I came here today to finally say what I should have said 15 years ago. Thank you. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for keeping it quiet. Thank you for proving that real heroes don't need cameras or recognition. And thank you for never using your celebrity to profit from the worst day of our lives. That means more to us than you'll ever know. Michael extended his hand. Tom took it, and the 2 men embraced as the crowd around them erupted in applause. Strangers were hugging each other. Firefighters in dress uniforms were saluting. And Tom Hanks, who had spent 15 years hiding what he had done, finally let himself cry. When they separated, Tom wiped his eyes and spoke, his voice barely above a whisper but carried by the silence around him. Michael, I need to say something. What I did wasn't heroism. Heroism was running into burning buildings knowing you might not come out. Heroism was spending days and weeks at Ground Zero searching for brothers you knew you'd never find alive. Heroism was the first responders who gave their health and their lives. I just showed up and carried buckets. That's all. No, Michael said firmly. That's not all. You showed up when you didn't have to. You worked when you could have watched from a distance. You kept quiet when you could have turned it into a career highlight. That's a different kind of heroism, but it's heroism nonetheless. It's the kind of quiet service that built this country, and it's the kind we need to remember and honor. Another voice spoke from the crowd, a woman in her 50s wearing a photo button with a firefighter's face on it. My husband was FDNY. He died in the South Tower. He would have been honored to work beside you, Mr. Hanks. Thank you for honoring him by showing up. Then another voice. My brother was there during cleanup. He died 2 years ago from 9/11 related cancer. Thank you for being there with him. And another. I'm a retired Port Authority officer. I was there too. I remember seeing you but not believing it was really you. Thank you for keeping it quiet all these years. It meant it was real, not a publicity stunt. One by one, people in the crowd stepped forward to shake Tom's hand or simply say, thank you. Firefighters, police officers, construction workers who had been at Ground Zero, family members of victims, all of them expressing gratitude for something Tom had never intended to be recognized for. Tom spent the next 2 hours at the memorial, talking to people, listening to their stories, honoring their losses. The video of Michael Rodriguez's revelation went viral within hours. By evening, it was the top story on every news network. By the next day, it had been viewed over 50 million times. And Tom Hanks, who had kept the secret for 15 years, found himself at the center of a national conversation about service, sacrifice, and what it really means to be a hero. In the days following the revelation at the memorial, Tom Hanks received thousands of messages from Americans thanking him for what he had done. But more surprisingly, he received messages from hundreds of other volunteers who had been at Ground Zero, ordinary Americans who had traveled from all over the country to help and who had also never spoken publicly about their service. Your story gave me permission to finally talk about what I experienced, wrote a construction worker from Ohio. I went to Ground Zero for 2 weeks. I never told anyone except my wife because I didn't want people to think I was bragging or looking for credit. But seeing you honored for quiet service made me realize it's okay to acknowledge what we did, not for glory, but to remember that Americans show up for each other. Tom realized that his 15 years of silence, while well-intentioned, had inadvertently contributed to a larger cultural forgetting. The narrative of 9/11 had focused rightly on the first responders who died and the victims who were lost. But thousands of ordinary Americans had also shown up in the days and weeks after. Volunteers from across the country who took time off work, spent their own money on travel and supplies, and did backbreaking work in toxic conditions because their country needed them. Those volunteers had largely remained invisible, both because they didn't seek recognition and because the culture had no framework for honoring quiet service. Tom's story created space for those stories to emerge. Within a month, a grassroots movement called the Quiet Heroes of 9/11 had formed, dedicated to documenting and honoring the thousands of volunteers who had worked at Ground Zero. Tom became the unofficial spokesperson, using his platform to amplify their stories rather than his own. Michael Rodriguez and Tom developed a close friendship. Michael shared more details about those 3 days at Ground Zero that Tom had partially blocked from memory due to trauma and exhaustion. He told Tom about how his presence had lifted spirits among firefighters who were emotionally destroyed by what they were finding, or not finding, in the rubble. You probably don't remember this, Michael told Tom during a coffee meeting, but on the second day, a group of us were taking a break and morale was at rock bottom. We'd been searching for 30 hours straight and hadn't found a single survivor. Everyone was starting to lose hope. Then you sat down with us and started telling stories about making Saving Private Ryan, about working with veterans, about what you'd learned about brotherhood and sacrifice. You didn't preach, you just told stories, and it reminded us why we were there, that we were honoring our brothers by not giving up. Tom didn't remember that conversation, but hearing about it brought tears to his eyes. I wish I had done more, he said. You did exactly what was needed, Michael replied. You showed up. That's all any of us could do. Tom used his renewed connection to the 9/11 community to advocate for continued support for first responders suffering from 9/11-related illnesses. Many firefighters, police officers, and volunteers who had worked at Ground Zero were now dying from cancers and respiratory diseases caused by toxic exposure. Tom lobbied Congress alongside first responders, demanding full funding for the World Trade Center health program. In 2019, Tom testified before Congress in support of permanent authorization of the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund. His testimony was powerful not because he talked about his own 3 days at Ground Zero, but because he amplified the voices of first responders who were dying and needed help. "I spent 3 days at Ground Zero," Tom told Congress. "These men and women spent weeks, months, some of them years. They breathed toxic air because their country needed them. They're dying now because they served. We owe them more than gratitude. We owe them health care, compensation, and the promise that America doesn't forget its heroes when the cameras stop rolling." The fund received full authorization. Tom's testimony, combined with the advocacy of first responders like Michael Rodriguez, had made the difference. But perhaps the most meaningful impact of the revelation came in how it changed the cultural conversation about service and celebrity. For years, Americans had become increasingly cynical about celebrity charity and advocacy, viewing it as performative and self-serving. Tom's 15 years of silence, followed by Michael's revelation, demonstrated that genuine service doesn't require an audience. "We live in an age where everything is documented and shared," wrote one commentator, "where people post their charity work on social media and celebrities use causes to build their brands." Tom Hanks showed us that the most meaningful service often happens in private, that real patriotism doesn't need a press release, that the truest form of respect for tragedy is to honor it through action, not words. Tom's relationship with the 9/11 community deepened over the years. He attended memorial ceremonies not as a celebrity, but as part of the community. He maintained friendships with firefighters and volunteers he had met at Ground Zero. He quietly supported families of first responders who had died from 9/11-related illnesses. And he never stopped advocating for the idea that ordinary Americans have extraordinary capacity for service when their country needs them, if we create space for that service and honor it appropriately. In 2021, on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, Tom and Michael stood together at Ground Zero once again. The memorial was now a place of reflection and peace, the reflecting pools a stark contrast to the chaos and horror that had existed there 2 decades earlier. "I think about those 3 days all the time," Tom told Michael. "Sometimes I wonder if I did enough, if I should have stayed longer, if I should have done more." Michael shook his head. "Tom, you did exactly what America needed. You showed up, you worked, you left. You didn't make it about yourself. And 15 years later, your example reminded the country that service is its own reward. That's a gift you gave not just to us who were there, but to everyone who needs to believe that good people still exist." They stood in silence for a moment, reading the names etched in bronze around the memorial pools. Names of people who had gone to work one Tuesday morning and never came home. Names of firefighters who had run toward danger. Names that represented families torn apart and lives cut short. "Never forget," Michael said quietly. "Never forget," Tom echoed, and neither of them ever would. The story of Tom Hanks and 9/11 teaches us something profound about service, sacrifice, and what it means to be an American. In a culture obsessed with recognition and credit, Tom showed us that the most meaningful actions are often the ones no one sees. For 15 years, Tom Hanks could have used his service at Ground Zero for career benefit, for public relations, for positioning himself as a patriotic hero. He never did. He kept silent not because he was ashamed of what he did, but because he understood that Ground Zero wasn't about him. It was about the victims, the first responders, and the nation's grief. Michael Rodriguez's revelation at the 2016 memorial wasn't about exposing a secret. It was about honoring a value that America was losing sight of. That service for its own sake, without expectation of recognition, is the highest form of patriotism. This story also reminds us that we're all capable of showing up when our country needs us. Tom Hanks didn't have special training. He wasn't a first responder. He was an ordinary American with extraordinary resources who chose to use those resources to help rather than just watch. His example challenges all of us. What are we doing with whatever resources and abilities we have? Are we showing up, or are we just watching? Finally, this story is about the power of community and brotherhood. The first responders at Ground Zero didn't see Tom Hanks, the movie star. They saw another volunteer willing to do hard work in impossible conditions. And when some of them recognized him, they kept his secret for 15 years because they understood what his silence represented. That's brotherhood. That's respect. That's America at its best. 20+ years after 9/11, we need these reminders more than ever. We need to remember that Americans are capable of extraordinary things when we work together. That service matters more than recognition, that real heroes often work in silence, and that we honor the fallen not through words, but through action and commitment to the values they died defending. Tom Hanks spent 3 days at Ground Zero doing backbreaking work that no one would have known about if Michael Rodriguez hadn't spoken up 15 years later. Those 3 days won't appear on his filmography. They won't win him any awards. But they represent something more important than any Oscar or box office record. They represent an American who showed up when his country needed him and asked for nothing in return. If this story moved you, share it to honor all the first responders, volunteers, and ordinary Americans who showed up on 9/11 and in the days after. Like and subscribe for more stories that remind us what true patriotism looks like. Comment below and tell us, where were you on 9/11? How did that day change you? Your story matters. Your memory matters. Together, we ensure that America never forgets. Until next time, remember, real heroes don't need cameras. Real patriotism doesn't need recognition. And the truest form of service is showing up when no one's watching and working because it's the right thing to do. Be someone who shows up. Be someone who serves in silence. Be someone who honors America's values through action, not words. That's how we keep the promise. Never forget. Never give up. Always show up.